Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Cafe Lockdown viewers, Freedom and Truth Australia viewers, and all viewers around the world. Thank you so much for joining myself, the suspended Dr. William Bay, for another episode 10 of All the Way with William Bay, with this week's guest, Dr. Melissa McCann. Thank you for coming on, Mel.
Thanks so much, William. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great that you could come on here this evening. And for those viewers out there who aren't aware of Mel is one of the most famous, brave and courageous doctors in Australia right now, if not the world. And why? Because she has shown strength and courage during this very trying time of Australia's fight for justice regarding the COVID so-called vaccines and the regulation and the vaccine injuries that have been happening in regards to that. We're going to hear from Mel in a moment, but I just want to let you all know that Dr. Mel McCann, she has a Bachelor of Pharmacy. She also has a Bachelor of Medicine, a Bachelor of Surgery. She's a Fellow of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, and she has a Graduate Certificate of Allergic Diseases. She started working as a pharmacist in Kangaroo Island in South Australia before commencing postgraduate medical education in Western Australia. And since completing her medical training, Dr. Mel has worked in Albany and Western Australia, as well as the remote clinic of Onslow in Western Australia via light aeroplane access. She then relocated to the Sunshine Coast in Queensland with her husband and 3 children. And Dr. McCann completed her general practice fellowship training in Gympie, Queensland, and finally relocating to the Whitsundays, where Dr. McCann has built a reputation as a caring and competent general practitioner in each practice she has worked. And she was also the first GP to provide services at Whitsunday Family Practice in 2015. Dr. Mel, have I left anything out?
No, that's pretty good. Pretty good introduction. Thanks, William.
Not at all, but I think you're more famous than just that. Tell us, what impact have you been having on the COVID-19 vaccine injuries around Australia? What have you been doing?
Yeah, well, William, I've been involved in a class action for vaccine injured people, and so I guess I was involved in sort of instigating that action, which was filed in April of this year in the federal court, and that's being represented by 3 injured named applicants, and hundreds now of other group members who've joined, who've provided their information to join that action. So that's been a really big part of my life, I guess, for the last 18 months. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I'm sort of involved, extracurricular activity I'm involved in right now.
Yeah. So you've been organising a class action suit for patients all around Australia that have been allegedly injured by the vaccines. Is that right?
Yes. Well, and actually, I should say their injuries or their adverse events in almost, the overwhelming majority of cases, that's actually not what's being alleged. The people that have joined this action, a great number of them have really unequivocal medical evidence, letters from their specialists that confirm that their reaction was from the vaccine. What the action is alleging, though, is that so the action is against the TGA, so John Skerritt, the Health Department, so Brendan Murphy, the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, and the Health Minister, Greg Hunt. And what's being alleged is that it was negligent actions on the part of those people in terms of their actions to approve the vaccines and their ongoing approval despite reports of safety issues. So that's the allegation, and importantly, that is just an allegation, and that's what the court will have to determine if in fact these injuries came about in some way through the actions that were improper of those people. That's what we're aiming to bring to a courtroom.
So Mel, this is a pretty gutsy action. What inspired you to start initiating this action and to keep following through on this even to this day?
Yeah, well, it started really with my own observations of seeing adverse events in both people who I knew, patients who had come in reporting these adverse events, and then as time went on, hearing from other colleagues around the country that there were a lot of events that were being reported but not really spoken about. And so what that prompted me to do was, in the first instance, to write to John Skerritt, and because I was really quite alarmed by what I was seeing in my small rural community. And then to go onto the TGA DEN database and find there, really I was quite shocked and astonished. This was around the end of 21, to see that there had already been the death reported of a teenager. There had already been a number of deaths of deaths to other teenagers from cardiac arrest, and also reports of cardiac arrest and other really serious adverse events, including particularly in young people, but thousands of events even at that stage that you just wouldn't expect to see that with a vaccination campaign. I mean, we certainly don't see that every year when there's flu vaccines or the childhood vaccines that are being given every year. So this was really rang such alarm bells for me. And so, yeah, I wrote to John Skerritt, and I guess I expected a really different response to that, to what I got, because there have been circumstances in the past where doctors and nurses have raised issues, for example, after a flu vaccine program, which was in 2010 from memory. And, that prompted a fairly rapid response and a withdrawal, a suspension of the program, and what ended up being a sort of statewide inquiry into what had happened. And unfortunately, one child was left with a permanent neurological deficit from that particular year of the flu vaccines. And then, so I guess that for the first time, I was just really shocked at the response that I received from someone within a position of power and bureaucracy, I suppose, in terms of the way that John Skerritt responded, which was essentially to say to me, young people sadly die suddenly every year, and so coincidentally we're going to see some deaths after these vaccines. And just from just a statistical, logical, pharmacovigilance standpoint, that just didn't add up to me. And so I guess that's what really started a process, the process that continues to this day. And I guess my next steps from there was to continue writing letters. I wrote another letter with some colleagues, a number of specialists from around the country who were also privately, of course, because of the risks of AHPRA, were privately voicing some of the safety concerns that they had. And so we co-authored a follow-up letter to that. And then in amongst all of that, I decided to start a freedom of information process. And all of this is very foreign to me. I've never written so many letters in my life. I've never done a freedom of information request. But that was actually a suggestion from a doctor on a closed Facebook group, where I put this letter in November of 21 and said, does anyone want to sign with me? Is anyone else seeing something? And of course, publicly, no one on that closed group would really talk about it, but a lot of those doctors contacted me afterwards privately. And one suggestion or one comment that was made on that post that I made was to say, well, you can't just suggest wrongdoing. Why don't you make a freedom of information request and get some evidence of this? And I thought, I hadn't thought of that. Great idea. So then that started a several months long process of trying to obtain some understanding from the TGA as to how safety surveillance was occurring, how, if there were hundreds of reports of deaths actually sort of by that stage. We're talking sort of that first quarter to the first half of 22. And just really some understanding of, okay, what had the assessment been, particularly thinking of deaths, how were they being evaluated with all of these tens of thousands, and now I think we're up to 140,000 adverse events reports to the database. What was the process whereby the TGA was evaluating their reports? What was their process for gathering information from the doctors and from the patients? And then what was the process from what seemed like just an astonishing number of safety events? How was that process happening whereby the TGA was deciding that none of these events represented a safety signal? So that was what I wanted to know.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that these 140,000 events and the lack of the response from the TGA is what prompted both your lawsuit and also your concern that things weren't being done correctly in Australia. Have I got that correct?
Yes, at the time this all started, of course, there weren't 140,000. I think there's 140,000 now, roughly thereabouts, but exactly right. A number that was extraordinary compared to any other product, let alone any other vaccine. Yeah, that was what prompted
So,
it and started.
and what I understand, Mel, is that you are currently a practicing doctor, a general practitioner in the Whitsundays. Is that correct? Are you still practicing at the moment?
I am still practicing. Yep.
Yes. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a currently registered, reputable, intelligent, and hardworking doctor uh, working hard to protect the interests of the patients that she looks after and the public. My question to you, Mel, is where are our other colleagues? I understand that there are 875,000 health practitioners, not all doctors, of course. What makes you special or inspired to get out there and have a go? Why are you out there having a go when some of our colleagues aren't?
Well, to be honest, I don't think I'm particularly, there's anything special about it. I think there's a minority of health professionals that are speaking publicly, and I think AHPRA plays a big role in that, and that's something that I'm also, in the throes of dealing with. But actually, well before I cottoned on or started to see safety issues, I now know that there were quite a number of doctors who were doctors, nurses, health professionals raising a range of issues prior to me ever saying anything. So there are actually quite a number of health professionals out there that actually are raising concerns, writing letters, publishing into the peer-reviewed literature what they're seeing with adverse events. So I guess it's perhaps all of that is not being in the mainstream attention, but I'm definitely not the only one, and obviously yourself as well, William, that have raised a range of safety concerns.
Yes, yes. And we'll talk more about AHPRA in a moment. A lot of my viewers would often ask and would like to know, what percentage would you estimate, Mel, of our colleagues, of the doctors in Australia, are not aware of vaccine injuries of the COVID-19 type in Australia? Do you think there is a percentage? And if so, what would you put that percentage at?
That's a tough question. I would think it would be very few who have not seen someone with an adverse event after a vaccine. I would think it would be the minority who have not seen anyone with an adverse event. Okay. And then from that majority who have seen patients or who are aware of even colleagues or friends or family with adverse events, I think that majority of our colleagues fall into, I guess, a number of different camps. And I think some of them who are quite openly raising their own concerns about safety issues. On the other end of that, people who are, I think, very passionately defensive of vaccine safety. And then I think in between, perhaps a spectrum of, yes, perhaps we're seeing more than we usually would, but on the other hand, COVID is such a severe illness, and perhaps that is justified. I think there's a spectrum of opinions, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, and you're more than welcome to it, Mel. And there always is a spectrum, as you say, a grey area. Things are rarely black and white in this country or in any ethical situation. But do you think that doctors have done enough, or do you think they do need to be speaking out more publicly about what they're seeing privately in their clinics?
Yeah, that is tough as well. I mean, sure, I probably would have found this experience a little easier, and I imagine you would have as well, if there were more people talking publicly about it. But at the same time, I think I understand the whole range of issues that surround this. And one of my an observation that I've made the whole way is that, of course, doctors were really first in line, first lining up their children, first to line up their family members. And I think I think it wasn't the case that there were huge numbers, certainly for a long time at the beginning, who were genuinely concerned about the safety. I think the opposite is true. I think for most doctors, they weren't concerned about the safety. And then I think as time's gone on, I mean, what I hear from people is that I think what's happening more behind closed doors now is that patients are saying, yeah, my doctor just said, look, the AHPRA guideline no longer recommends that for you. You know, I don't necessarily recommend that you have another booster, things like that. So I'm hearing that more and more, and that makes me think, okay, a lot of doctors aren't going to necessarily want to or think they need to be really, I guess, public if they have a concern about it. And that's up to, I suppose, everyone to decide what they feel they should do if they're concerned about a safety issue. But that they are, I think more and more are privately having a better understanding of even just simply where the AHPRA guideline currently stands, which really only makes a recommendation for elderly and at-risk patients.
Yeah. And Mel, in medical school, I was taught many things, some of which were being the value of informed consent. And I was also taught that public speaking is something that people maybe fear more than death itself when they've done their survey. So I disagree with you. I do think you are special. I do think you are doing something special with this lawsuit to protect the interests of people. And I want to commend you for doing that. Has this come at a cost for you by pursuing this lawsuit? And if so, please tell us what that cost has been.
Well, I think first of all, any cost is far outweighed by, I guess, what I feel personally. I don't know, just the blessings, I guess, of being involved in something like this has been personally and professionally far and away the most difficult but rewarding thing I've ever been involved in. And for me, it's been almost a breath of fresh air at the end of that time of COVID, where I feel like we were really a little bit helpless in terms of looking after patients. You know, the lockdowns that meant even patients who were dying in palliative care couldn't have their family and friends beside them. And then so many people were struggling with things like, the lockdowns and all of the restrictions, the impacts on their businesses, on their lives. Then, even things like mask mandates, and then certainly the vaccine mandates. I think it was really a bit of a helpless situation. And then now I feel like I can do something to help. So
you had some blessings there, but have any of the authorities, shall we say maybe AHPRA, come after you? I know they've come after me and Dr. Miley Trin and Dr. Hobart for sticking up for the rights of our patients. What about yourself? How have things been going with you?
Yes, well, I also see this as a blessing and opportunity. But yes, AHPRA. Yeah, so I did some public speaking events in February of this year. That was kindly sort of sponsored by the United Australia Party, Clive Palmer, and they brought over Peter McCullough and Pierre Corey and John Leake, and so that was a great thing to be a part of. And that was terrifying. I agree with all the things you said about public speaking. That was a really terrifying thing to do, but I felt that was really important to say that. To say the things that I said. And so I had a complaint made about me, apparently a number of complaints as a consequence.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, so they go to the Health Ombudsman and then to AHPRA. And so from there, the process is that AHPRA, asks you or the medical board for a response. And I guess I did see that actually as a bit of an opportunity, because I had previously written to the head of the medical board with all of my concerns and a lot of what I said in those talks, and asked them to meet with me and said I had concerns about the safety of the public, etc. So I saw this as an opportunity of like, well, now I get my chance to speak to them face to face.
Wait. Let me get this straight. So what you're saying is that following the success of your public speaking events with the tour that involved Dr. Peter McCullough, United Australia Party, by you presenting data at a conference, you were saying that a complaint was made against you to the Office of the Queensland Health Ombudsman. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you know who made this complaint against you?
Actually, they did tell me the person's name, but obviously I won't say that.
Sure. Okay. So there was some named complaints made against you, and those complaints were referred to AHPRA. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And for my listeners out there and viewers, so AHPRA is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. It's an organisation incorporated as a statutory authority in Melbourne, and it purports to run the country nationally via legislation created in Queensland. And they then took you to task over your presentations. Is that right?
Mm. Yeah, well, that's right.
What was the source? Okay, and what was the source of their problem? What, in a nutshell, what was their complaint that they wanted to follow up against you?
Well, the person making the complaint basically suggested that what I had said was, blatant misinformation. It was, misleading to the public, and should be followed. That should be followed up by AHPRA. And then AHPRA, I guess, ultimately in the end of me being able to present to them in writing and also make a verbal submission. Well, their decision didn't make any reference really to the validity or the accuracy of what I said, but and you can see a lot of this on my AHPRA profile. It says that essentially the outcome of their decision, and so what the concern was, that I was promoting distrust in the TGA through my statements, and that I was seeking to actively undermine the COVID vaccine immunisation program. And so then on that basis, they decided to professionally caution me, which obviously is a very serious thing. It's not, not something I've had happen before, and to submit me to a re-education program, so to be re-educated on the benefits and risks of the COVID vaccines. And so Yeah.
Okay. This is a lot of information, and this is quite shocking. I don't think people understand how brave you are and the cost this has had to you for your clinic and for yourself. So you've been basically reprimanded by the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency for speaking out at a national conference using data. And again, I want to commend you for having the guts to A, do that presentation, and B, to come on here tonight and be so frank and honest with myself and my audience to tell the world what's happening with AHPRA. I commend you greatly on that. It's truly by telling the truth and exposing these things that we can get to a better understanding of this country. But so what you've said is that they have mandated that you have re-education and you're given a professional caution. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and do you accept these punishments for your factual truth telling, or will you be doing anything more about this, Mel?
Well, I mean, I do think in terms of accepting it, I guess I do think I've spent a lot of the last year and a half actually really educating myself on the benefits and risks of the vaccines, and that's been part of the role that I've been playing in this legal action. But at the same time, no one knows everything, so I'm not averse to any opportunity to learn more from a specialist. That's not really my issue at all with this. But I do take issue with the decision, and so I have appealed that. So there is a process to appeal that decision through QCAT. So I've done that. Yeah, I've done that, and that's moving through, I guess, the processes. And the reason I feel that it's really important to appeal this is because I think the precedent that is set has such a range of, I'm sure, unintended consequences in terms of restricting doctors from being able to make factual statements based on their knowledge, their training, and their observations in patients. To restrict someone from being able to speak freely about that, I think you don't have to look hard to think of where that might lead. And so I just think it's so important that be confronted head on. And I think I'm really grateful for the opportunity that the tribunal exists for that reason, that this decision can be reviewed by a judge. And, I hope I hope that that might succeed, or at the very least to bring some, attention to the issue that there are actually a number of doctors out there that are raising these safety concerns and are afraid to be open and honest about that. And clearly that has the potential for an enormous impact on the doctor-patient relationship, on informed consent for patients, and on all of science. Because if you can't honestly, I mean, where does that end? Can you not research or publish on a topic that is deemed, contrary to a public health narrative? Can you not, undertake legitimate scientific research in an area? I mean, you could just see how much this could impact medicine if what goes on within the privacy of a consultation. And of course, public health, I guess, is one discipline that's purports to look at the entire population and what can be done to improve health. I mean, that's what I guess public health is supposed to do. But the what a doctor does within their own consultation room has to take into account all the circumstances of their patient. Their patient might have a variety of background medical conditions that weren't assessed in the clinical trials, or maybe their patient is pregnant and maybe it wasn't tested in pregnancy, things like that. And so I just, to me, this just has to be fought. So that's what I'm doing.
And I commend you again. And what shocks me, nay, angers me, Mel, is that for myself, when I spoke out against the COVID vaccines, I did it quite assertively, quite loudly. Some would say a little bit rudely. But you have done everything right. You have spoken very clearly and with facts, and without any interruptions to any conferences, and you haven't stormed any buildings. And yet the AHPRA, who do not have a single doctor on the board, have taken it upon themselves to give you a professional caution and to mandate re-education. And I find that outrageous. I find that disgusting, especially in this day and age, which is almost December 2023, where we now have the CDC in America admitting that there is DNA in the vaccines. And we have the revelations coming out of New Zealand today from the New Zealand Loyal Party with Liz Gunn, showing a whistleblower's data of more than 120 deaths per day, excess deaths, really starting to spike up. Yes, all coming out today from 2022. They only used to have more than 120 deaths every few months, and now the data shows from 2022, almost every single day, deaths equivalent to the Christchurch massacre happening regularly in New Zealand. So this is some shocking news. What they're calling on Twitter or X at the moment, the mother of all revelations. For those viewers out there on Cafe Lockout, please see Michael Griffith's expose on that today. So Mel, things aren't getting better with these vaccines; they're getting worse, and they've just approved another one coming in. When do you think the TGA or AHPRA or the Department of Health is going to stop this madness? When do you think it's going to stop?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, that's actually part of what prompted me to initially seek out a legal opinion on a legal action, because I formed the opinion that only legal action would stop this, actually, just because I'd seen at that point that, the way that letter writing was being responded to, the way that evidence being presented was being responded to, the way that the patients themselves were telling me they were being responded to with their reports to the TGA, that they weren't being followed up, that they weren't being thoroughly investigated. And I guess I wondered if the only way, because I guess that has happened in history, like, the Vioxx sort of scandal, and then the more recent, sort of behavior around opiate use within the pharmaceutical industry, thalidomide, things like that. It has often only ended when there's been action of a court and, discovery of what really has been going on behind the scenes in terms of what was known and what wasn't known, and the safety assessment. So I do think the legal action is actually really important, not just for all of the injured people that have been suffering for so long, for them to be able to, for them to be able to have their stories heard by a judge. I think just as important as that is the bigger picture, that hopefully something like this will force a better understanding of the safety issues around this novel platform. Because, there's 4 factories being built, and to pump out hundreds of millions of these vaccines in a year. And in my opinion, my medical opinion, and based on everything, all of the research that I've done, and I don't think this mRNA platform is in any way safe, or certainly don't think that's been established. And so, I think legal action at this point is really important to reduce any future and ongoing harm.
Yeah. Now, so we have the legal actions by yourself, which I think are in conjunction with NBARBI solicitors down in New South Wales.
I know Brisbane, yes.
Brisbane, I'm sorry, NBARBI. And we have actions by Dr. Julian Fidge fighting regarding whether there was correct GMO licenses for these mRNA vaccines in the Federal Court of Australia. I know Dr. Mark Hobart has been in the Victorian Court of Appeal recently, arguing the ludicrous nature of AHPRA suspending doctors indefinitely up to 4 years at a time. It's been going to 16 months almost for myself now, more than 2 years for Miley and Mark. It's just outrageous. But there's another class action, I believe, happening around Australia at the moment, that one involving Julian Gillespie and a few other persons. What do you think the prospects of that class action having success in Australia, Mel?
Well, I'd probably, I'm not sure if I'm familiar enough with that whole action to comment on it. And I guess I feel that I feel that it's important that we're all sort of working together on this, and in a way that action is seems to be a bit of a distraction from ours, but anyway.
Well, what differences are there between that class action, your class action? Would you care to perhaps highlight the differences?
So from what I understand of it, it's a different. So I believe that the team plans to name a whole range of other parties. So for it to be a much bigger action, I suppose. And it's being, I guess, the recruitment process is involving, I think, an extensive advertising campaign, and it hasn't started yet, of course. So, I mean, my hope is that ours will just continue running, and may even be before a courtroom, before another action, gets to that point as well. And I mean, to be honest, from my way of thinking, it's not about which legal team runs it. I mean, I'm so proud of NBARBI and our barrister, and I think we've got like a wonderful, hardworking team. And but it's not about. It's about the injured and them getting their say in court and compensation as soon as possible. So it's I feel on the one hand a little bit sad that something's come along as a bit of a maybe a distraction and it causes a bit of confusion, I think, as well. I've read a few things that have been said about our matter that seems to be like mischaracterizing it, but at the same time I just think everyone's gone through so much in the past few years, and I'm supportive of anyone who's trying to do something good in that environment. So
yes. And so with your lawsuit, is it still open for people who are listening to this evening who feel they've been vaccine injured to join your lawsuit, Mel?
Yeah, definitely. The action is so in Australia, in general, class actions are what they call opt-out, which means once you define who the class is, then everyone by default falls under that class unless they opt out. And so everyone has to have the opportunity to opt out. But it means that everyone with a vaccine injury, so how we've defined our class is anyone with what's considered a serious vaccine injury, as it's defined by the TGA and the FDA, which is basically anything more than a really minor or transient effect. So yeah, so it is, and people are every day joining. So you can log on through the website, submit your details, and that way your name's sort of down. But at the same time, the action is going to represent everyone. So if it succeeds, everyone is able to benefit from that, from that success.
So yeah, if there is a finding and a monetary payout, the award is split evenly between the participants. Is that how it works?
I think questions like that is probably further down the track. So my understanding of it is that generally these types of actions are run in two parts. So it's seeking compensation, and personal injuries compensation in Australia seems to be fairly straightforward. It's like what were your costs, what will your ongoing costs be, and then that's part of how that's factored in. But the class action is also seeking compensation for like non-economic losses, the need for carer, and things like that. So all of that forms part of our claim. But my understanding is that the first part of the action is running the allegation, the claim, and then if we succeed in that, which means there's a finding that the TGA, the health department, those parties were negligent in their approval and ongoing approval of the vaccines, then the next phase is the calculation of losses for the class and then how that's administered. That's as far as I understand it.
Okay. Speaking of cost, so is there a cost for anybody to join your class action lawsuit, Mel?
No, there's no cost to join. Yeah, all of the details of that is on the from the website, which is classaction.com.au. There's information on the action and there's a link to join there as well. And so it is being run
classaction.com.au.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is being run on a shoestring budget and through the extremely generosity of people that are involved in this behind the scenes, and it is being run also by sort of crowdfunding, so by donations, people that are contributing so that this action can win. So it's really, I guess, been an amazing kind of whole community effort. It's me that talks about it, but it's not just me that's involved in it. There's a lot of people behind the scenes that are supporting this, which has been amazing.
And again, I want to commend you for giving hope and inspiration to others to show them that there is a light at the end of the tunnel if they have been injured. But I see a comment from one of our viewers this evening, from Aaron Marsh, and sometimes I see this from the people who would call themselves anti-cookers, that nobody cares, as this gentleman has said. What are your thoughts on that? There's a segment of Australian society that says that COVID's over, it's all finished with. Why are we still harping on about it? What are your thoughts on that? Is COVID over? Is the vaccine injuries over? Why haven't you let this go, Mel?
Yeah, well, I guess you could take that two ways. I mean, I think for a lot of people that have had any loss from all of COVID, the vaccines, the lockdowns, everything else, I think there has almost been a feeling that they've been abandoned, that they've been abandoned by society, that they've been abandoned by their leaders, and that no one does care about them in a way. So I don't know if the comment was meant that way, but I know what you're saying. There's a lot of people out there that feel like, get over it, move on, like stop talking about what's happened with the vaccines. But it's like, Definitely. No way. No way. Like this is huge. This is the biggest, most horrific thing that has happened to such a number of people. And if everyone could hear all of their stories, I don't think anyone would feel like that, would feel like, let's move on. I think if everyone knew how much harm had been done and how it has affected the lives of so many people who continue to suffer, that people would not be saying, let's move on. People would say, there needs to be justice.
Mel, I saw on the news today, and I don't normally watch the news, but I'm visiting my mother's place and she loves the ABC, so often I want to strangle her. But so I had to go through it and watch it tonight, and I saw all the politicians standing up and clapping and recognizing and saying sorry for the thalidomide disaster from the 1950s, 60s, where ladies were given medications for nausea during pregnancy, and they had all the baby deaths and deformities. And now that, 50, 60 years later, Parliament is finally saying sorry. And I thought, what a bunch of hypocrites, these disgusting, immoral, self-serving politicians in Parliament, all pretending to care for these ladies and their children from 50 years ago, when we have the exact same situation happening right now in this country. And where are they now? Where are they now? Am I being too harsh, or what are your thoughts on that, Mel?
No, it's I mean, how do you characterize behavior like that? Are they somehow oblivious to? I mean, that seems impossible. Has it just been long enough that an apology has been forced by virtue of, say, the I think it was a Senate inquiry finally in 2019 into the handling of thalidomide? Perhaps that is what has forced an apology that perhaps another 60 years might never have been forthcoming. I mean, it's hard to reconcile. It's the whole situation is very difficult to reconcile. But I mean, my hope is that but the fact that we have brought this legal action, the fact that so many people around the world are being really proactively talking about what's happened with these vaccines and not stopping talking about it and not stopping supporting each other, and that it will not be 60 years before there's an apology from the mouth of one of our prime ministers. I really hope to see that very soon. And I think that has to be the first step towards making amends in some way for what's happened to so many people. I think there has to be an apology.
Yeah, I think there must be an apology at the very least. There must be justice. There must be accountability. And we cannot rest until we get these things. And that's got to happen much faster than the apologies that happened to the stolen generation, to these thalidomide babies, even to the victims of smoking. We've got to turn around as a medical profession and start recognizing that we've either A, made a mistake, or B, have been complicit in evil, and we need to repent and to change course. Changing course and adapting is the way for healing for everybody. But I see another comment here, apart from this one, which I like a lot. There's another comment that the courts are corrupt. I think I've just lost it. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the courts are corrupted? Here it is from Matt Underwood. He says, our courts have been corrupted. We are in a lawless world. Do you agree, disagree? Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a maybe naive optimist. I'm an optimist. I mean, I hear that a lot. I feel a little bit. It's hard. It's difficult, I guess, having a legal action at this point, perhaps in this whole last few years fiasco, because there have been quite a number of legal actions that have unfortunately failed. But then I've also heard from a lot of different legal professionals from different backgrounds who've sort of said, oh, well, that action maybe wasn't the right course of action, or this action, that action, So I just think, I'm sure just like any professional, there would be members, of the judiciary maybe who, I don't know, have a bias, of course, just like doctors, just like any other professional. But I actually have a lot of, I have a lot of optimism that there is justice still to be had in the courts. I think it's our last hope, really. If there's no justice within the political system, within the making of our laws, well, then the only other way that happens is within the making of laws in a courtroom. And so I just think it might just be that it needs to be, the right action to the right court, with the right applicants, and maybe there's a success. So I mean, I'm hoping for that with my QCAT matter. I'm definitely hoping for that with this class action, and I don't know what's the alternative. Just sit back and think that's it, we're done. I don't know. I think yes, there have been failures, but maybe there's other reasons for that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mel. What drives me forward is I have an eternal optimism as well. Naively or otherwise, I believe that we can get justice in the courts 100%. And I wish you all the best with your QCAT action against the evil clowns of AHPRA. My case is ongoing with AHPRA in the High Court of Australia. In fact, my case regarding freedom of speech, where I was arrested for protesting outside of AHPRA, is ongoing. There still hasn't been a verdict in that case, despite being more than 2 weeks since the trial was concluded. And I find that very encouraging, actually, because I haven't lost any of my court matters yet. I've got 3 court matters going. The other one regarding the constitutionality of the referendum that we just had, that still is ongoing for those people who aren't aware of that. And yet no finalised findings against me. So I personally have found that there's a lot of hope in the judiciary, even as a self-represented applicant. And we do have a new Chief Justice of the High Court, Stephen Gageler, who's led the High Court in a very recent and brave decision, in my opinion, where they found on the 7th of November that indefinite detention of detainees was not lawful. I fully respect and like that decision, because leaving the issue of criminal immigrants aside, you can't have people indefinitely in limbo forever. You're either guilty or not guilty, in trouble or not in trouble. So I think it's we are seeing change, we are seeing reform in the courts, and I'm very optimistic towards that. But before I let you go, and you have been very gracious this evening, Mel, and I have put you on the spot many times, I would like to put you on the spot one more time. As a doctor, as a current practicing doctor, would you or would you not advise patients getting the new XBB COVID vaccine coming out next month in Australia?
Right. Well, actually, because I've been so involved in this matter, and most patients seem to know that I've been involved in this, so I don't actually get this question very often. If I was to be asked my opinion on that, as is allowed for by AHPRA, I would state that I have a conscientious objection to the vaccines. I'm not the person to answer that question, and I couldn't in any unbiased way, because I've just simply seen and heard from and seen the medical evidence from so many people who've been injured from these vaccines. And I'm, of course, completely conflicted in my opinion, in a way, in regards to the vaccines, because of my involvement in this class action. So I would state that I have a conflict of interest and a conscientious objection in a sense to the vaccine. So and again, we're allowed to state that we have that under AHPRA, and as long as we let the patient know where they could access the vaccine if they decided to have it. And of course, I could refer anyone to the AHPRA guidelines, which again, as it stands currently, in fact, is not recommending that booster for the majority of the Australian population. In fact, almost everyone except the elderly and those very medically at risk. So for young, healthy people, AHPRA is not, in fact, even recommending that. Yeah.
Well done. No, I think you have answered that question beautifully, especially with the constraints that you are subject to, that all doctors, nurses, paramedics, even optometrists, chiropractors are subject to. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mel is a very brave person for even daring to answer that question, because AHPRA still has a position statement. It's called the 9 March 2021 position statement, where they say that any advice or comments on social media or otherwise, exactly where we are now, that goes against the best available evidence or the National Immunisation Campaign is subject to regulatory action. Now, in my opinion, not Dr. Mel's, in my opinion only, I think that this is an extremely unlawful, vicious, and indignant attack on the clinical sovereignty and clinical knowledge of doctors and nurses of this country. And a board, and whether it's a medical board or midwifery board or the AHPRA board, have no right at all to interfere in the doctor-patient or nurse-patient or chiropractor-patient relationship. And if they do, they should get their noses out of it, because they know not what they're talking about. So for myself, as a suspended doctor, I have the beautiful freedom of saying to everybody out there, run away and run quick from that vaccine, because that vaccine is likely to harm you, if not kill you. And with all the other things that we're finding out about it, whether it's nanobots, DNA, mRNA sticking around with pseudouridase and all the other things that are in this vaccine, it's probably the worst thing that was ever created and ever put onto Australian society ever. And that includes asbestos and thalidomide. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank Dr. Mel for her bravery once again in conclusion, Mel, what would you like to say to the people of Australia this evening who've been listening? Could you sum up or any final words that you'd like the people to hear?
Probably just not to lose hope. Like, I guess going back to what we said about, the courts and things that have lost. This is the first action that has really questioned the safety of the vaccines, and all other actions. I guess they've been able to justify mandates based on saying, well, the TGA tells us how safe and effective they are. And I think this is the first action that is going to be seriously questioning that. That is what this action is. And so I have a lot of hope that once we shine a light on that, we might find that the courts are able to view some of these matters really differently. And so don't lose hope. There's a lot of people out there who are fighting behind the scenes to get some justice.
That's right. Do not lose hope. Keep fighting, keep speaking out. I think that the way to win is to keep speaking out, just the way that Dr. Mel has been speaking. And just tell us your vaccine injury website again one more time, please, Mel.
So that's COVID Vax, VAX,
classaction.com.au. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening tonight. We'll see you next week for the final episode of All the Way with William Bay this year for 2023, episode 11, next Thursday, 8 p.m. Queensland time, 9 p.m. New South Wales cockroach time. But for now, that's been it. Thank you, Mel. See you later, everybody. Good night and God bless.
Thanks, William. Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.